Jack Milton, VP Geology with Fireweed Metals, and I'm going to run through a presentation that I recently made at the Yellowknife Geoscience Forum in Northwest Territories. The presentation is a new wave of exploration in the Mackenzie Mountains, the Gayna Project, which is a zinc, lead, silver, gallium, germanium project. First, I'd like to acknowledge that the Gayna Project is located on the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples, including the Sato settlement area, the Gwich'in settlement area, and the asserted territory of the First Nation of Natchitoches. We'll be making some forward-looking statements during this presentation, which should not be unduly relied upon. Gayna, where is it? It's 200 kilometers north of our flagship project, which is the McMillan Pass project in Yukon. Gayna is located in the Northwest Territories. It's in the Mackenzie Mountains, and it's a highly underexplored area. You see on this slide, in the bigger picture, in the southwest, we have the Selwyn Basin, which is one of the most prolific zinc districts on Earth. It has the Anvil District, the Howards Pass District, and the Mac Pass District, which each have some very large zinc deposits. And those zinc deposits are of this laminated, clastic-dominated or shale-hosted zinc. And adjacent to that, we have the Mackenzie platform, which is a large carbonate platform that sits up to the east. And in the bigger picture, we have large deposits down in the basin, and we may anticipate large deposits forming up on the platform. We acquired this property in 2022 by staking, and the reason why was due to this new geological model that compared the mineralization and the geology at Gayna to a location in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Kipushi mine. And the property has been explored in the past. Rio Tinto were in there in the 70s, and they drilled 28,000 meters, and they defined an exploration target at the time. So our approach is taking these new ideas, using new technology, using gravity surveys and LiDAR to define this search space that has previously been not explored in this area. And we intend to explore there and anticipate making a discovery. So what is this new model for zinc mineralization that I mentioned? Well, it was put out in a paper in Economic Geology in 2018 by Elizabeth Turner, David Broughton, and Tim Brooks, and it compared Gayna to Kipushi. Kipushi is a long existing mine that's going back into construction right now. And the resource estimate that was put out for Kipushi is stated on the right there. And just in there, measured and indicated, they have 11.8 million tons of extremely high-grade material, over 35% zinc and 0.8 copper, 1.1% lead, and 23 grams of silver. So extremely high-grade mineralization. And that's located in what they call the Big Zinc Zone. And that's indicated on the Kipushi mine section in the middle of this slide as the figure BZ. So that mineralization is pasted onto the side of those blue rocks, and those blue rocks are a carbonate reef, specifically a reef comprised of stromatolites, these calcium microbial deposits in Neoproterozoic rocks. And reef-forming stromatolites are extremely rare in geological history, and they're known from only two locations globally. One is the Kipushi mine, and the other is Gayna. So the section on Gayna on the left, you can see very similar. The blue rocks are the reef facies, and you have debris falling off these reefs, forming these trash breccias on the margins. And what Rio Tinto found at Gayna were these veins and breccias that form on the tops and the margins of these reefs, and they were targeting a stratiform laminated type deposit. Whereas this new comparison with Kipushi would anticipate the reef margin being a very good place to go and look for these massive sulfide zones that could potentially be considerably higher grade. So why are these reef margin locations favorable for exploration? Well, for a few reasons. One is you have a good rheological or lithological contrast between the reef-forming rocks and the surrounding rocks of shales and limestones, dollarstones. And secondly is due to differential compaction. So the reef forms as calcite, is deposited as a hard rock, whereas the off-reef rocks around it are not, and they undergo compaction and they lose porosity and permeability with that compaction. But due to being right up against the margin of these reefs, adjacent to an incompressible hard calcite deposit, the porosity and the permeability of the adjacent off-reef rocks is maintained. And this means that it forms a very good area for fluids to migrate and come up from the basin and form massive sulfide deposits on the margins of these reefs. And these would be these steep dipping deposits of massive sulfides. And this is conceptually what the target would look like at Gayna. So we have the reef rocks in blue in this map view. And if we use Kipushi as an analog, it's about 600 meters in strike. Its true thickness is up to about 100 meters. It's quite variable, but it's up to about 100 meters. And it would extend down the vertical margin of the reef for several hundred meters. So relatively small bodies, but extremely high grade. And in section view, this is what they may look like as a target would be pasted onto the side of one of these reefs. So if we take that and we look at the geology of the Gayna Project, we can see many reefs around on this geological map. So again, the reefs are the blue rocks, and they form these centers. We've labeled here the Intrepid Reef, the Zufil Reef, and there's a few other reefs. And around these reefs are showings of these critical minerals, zinc, gallium, and germanium. And the reefs are partially exposed at surface, but the vertical margins are covered by the reef cover rocks, by the dollarstones. So we have to infer where these reef margin positions are in the subsurface, which we've done through some very detailed field work, mapping, and digitization of historic drill logs and interpretation of the reef versus the off-reef facies. So this is what the exploration looks like in the past. Rio Tinto drilled a grid of holes about 600 meter spacing, which is represented by the black dots on this map. And overlaid on this is the locations of the reef margins that we've mapped out using drill core logging and interpretation and surface mapping. So you can see that much of these reef margin locations are left untested by drilling, and almost all holes were vertical drill holes, so they would not have tested a vertical target very well. On the left, you can also see the big zinc zone at Kipushi shown at the same scale as the map. And you can see in any of these areas where the reef margins may occur in the subsurface, you could hide, one or more of these size of targets at Gayna. And look at the scale there. That's a 2-kilometer scale. So Rio approached this with a very broad brush approach of drilling this out on 600 meter centers. So what did that look like? 600 meter space centers at the scale of these conceptual targets with vertical holes. You could be within, a few centimeters of one of these things and have almost no alteration and have no idea that you'd be right next to one of these and just missed it. And you'd be drilling, unaltered reef carbonate rocks or off-reef dollarstones. So I think that this leaves this opportunity at Gayna almost completely untested. So what does this stuff look like in outcrop? Well, this is from some prospecting and mapping work that we did here, and the known showings are very similar in style to MVT or Irish type system. You see these breccias and this coarse infill of different colors of sphalerite and calcite and dolomite and quartz. But these things have tended to be located around the reef tops and the reef margins. And no massive sulfides have been discovered yet. And what I think that these veins and these breccias around the reef margins represent is the sort of smoke around the edges of one of these massive sulfide targets. We also noticed that the sphalerite at Gayna is sometimes fluorescent under UV light and sometimes phosphorescent. So it fluoresces under UV, and you turn the UV light off and it keeps glowing, which you can see in the bottom right-hand image. And during prospecting at Gayna, we discovered a massive sulfide boulder that was over a meter in diameter as float in a creek that was draining the Intrepid Reef. And these are some examples of rocks that we chipped off from this huge boulder, showing massive galena and green sphalerite. And this is very encouraging for finding these higher grade massive sulfide areas around the margins of these reefs. We have demonstrated we can find this on the meter scale, and the next step would be to drill these things and see if we can demonstrate that on a much larger scale. And this is what the historic soil geochemistry looks like at Gayna. Here we were showing a gridded map of historic lead in soil. And note the scale. The scale bar there is 3 kilometers. So these are huge, huge lead anomalies of strong magnitude. The hottest colors there are over 250 ppm lead. We visited the Jaws anomaly and did some validation sampling, took 10 samples. Most of them were over 1%, and the highest soil sample is over 27% lead in soil. So these anomalies are 3 to 4 kilometers long, over a kilometer wide, very significant soil anomalies. And they seem to have this same sort of northwest-southeast grain to these anomalies, which is suggesting some form of structural control on top of the stratigraphic control. This is a similar map, but for zinc, showing a very similar kind of thing. These are carbonate rocks, so the background values for zinc are very low, and the peak values here are over 5,000 ppm zinc. So very large combined lead, zinc, historic soil anomalies. So what have we done with the exploration? Well, we've approached this with using very detailed, close station spacing ground gravity surveys supported with LiDAR surveys to get very high resolution DEM to provide detailed and accurate terrain corrections that are needed to pick up this type of gravity anomalies. We've used geological mapping and 3D targeting to constrain where these reef margins are. We picked those areas in particular to go up and follow up to do ground gravity surveys. On top of that, we anticipate doing a V10 mag survey to see if we can pick out any conductors and better constrain the stratigraphy and the structure. And from this, we feel that we'd be at the stage to do some follow-up drilling of a list of high priority targets. And on the right, what you can see there is a gridded map of the gravity survey across 2 of the reefs, the Intrepid Reef and the Zufio Reef. And I'm going to step through each one of these in turn here. So at the Intrepid Reef, we got a picture of it on the left, and on the right, we have a strip map, a geological section, and a gravity section. So at the Intrepid Reef, we have a cross-section line, and the Intrepid Reef occurs and crops out at surface in those areas and is represented by the blue rocks on the map. And you can see that the stratigraphy around the reef is draped around it, and this is due to this differential compaction around the reef margin areas. The discovery showing is highlighted there in pink, and that's visible from the air. You can see these spectacular breccias infilled by calcite and sphalerite and galena and pyrite, and all through that creek you find abundant, spectacular zinc mineralization. We see showing F, which is on the line of the section, and we see a gravity high located on that reef margin. So if we look at the geological section, you can see that the inferred position of that reef margin is covered by reef cover rock. So it's not exposed at surface. And we know, due to some historic drilling in and around that creek, that the off-reef rocks occur near the discovery showing A. So the reef margin must occur between there and the Intrepid Reef. And this is exactly where we see our strongest gravity anomalies, as you can see on the cross-section of these gravity highs focused around the reef margin positions, which is consistent with the model that we've been using for our approach to the exploration for massive sulfide type deposits. Now we go to the subfield reef. Again, a picture of the reef on the left and a strip map, geology section and gravity section. This is the section line at the subfield reef, and the reef occurs in these deeply incised canyons and represented as the blue rocks on the section. We see showings here around the margins of the reef. The P showing is located on the image, and you can see some rusty staining in the cliffs there around that showing. But the reef margin of interest is in the distance in this photo. And if you see that star that appeared at the margin of the reef and match that up to the geological cross-section, you can see at that point the reef starts dipping under the cover rock dollostones, and the reef margin is hidden in the subsurface by these dollostones. And again, we see a gravity high that is occurring around the inferred position of these reef margins in the subsurface. So here the reef margin is covered by about 50 to 100 meters of cover rocks and maybe masking the location of our massive sulfide targets. So to sum up, here we're testing a new concept, a new search space at Gayna within what we believe is a very large zinc system. And we've identified several compelling anomalies, and we see the potential there for high-grade massive sulfide deposits. And we eagerly await drill testing these targets in the future. So thanks everyone for your time. Again, I'm Jack Milton, VP Geology with Fireweed Metals. And if you have any questions, you can contact me by email at the address given on this slide. Thanks for listening.